Coming up on the Elected Podcast, there's just 20 days until you go to the polls for Election Day 2018 on November 6th. We talked to the Democratic candidate for the House of Representatives in New York's 22nd District, running against Claudia Tenney. All that and much more on the way for Episode 8 of the Elected Podcast, 20 Days. Joining me now on the podcast is Assemblyman Anthony Brindisi. Thank you so much for coming on, Assemblyman.
Anytime, Luke. Thank you so much for having me.
So I just wanted to give you a minute to kind of use this time to say whatever it is you want to say. We're exactly 20 days out from the election. What do you have to say to the voters?
Well, we're out there every day. Our volunteers are out knocking on doors, making phone calls. I'm appearing at town hall meetings. In fact, tonight I'm going to be with Congressman Richard Hanna. We're doing an event together in Shenango County, and he's going to talk about why he's supporting the campaign. And that's what we're finding all across the community right now. We're finding Democrats who are supporting the campaign, Republicans who are supporting the campaign, independents who are supporting the campaign, and that's what really people want. They want to see someone who can work with all the parties, who can help bring people together. That's something I've done during my service on the school board here in Utica. It's what I've done during my time in the state assembly, working with leaders like Joe Griffo and the county executive, Anthony Brindisi, and what I'll do in Congress, working with both sides of the aisle to try and get things done.
Yeah, and then I wanted to also talk about a new poll that just came out from the, it's actually Polling Company Incorporated, and it is, it shows you just about 8 points behind Congresswoman Tenney with a 5% margin. Do you want to comment on that poll and what you've been seeing in your own studies?
Well, I think when you start to dig into the methodology on that poll, you'll see it's very suspect, and our polls are showing a lot different projections, but to me, what matters the most is the poll that happens on Election Day, and voters are fed up with our current representative who has done everything in her power to try and divide people instead of bringing people together. And what we really need right now in Washington is someone who can bring folks together to bridge the divides on some of the big issues that are impacting people in this congressional district. As I go around and do town hall meetings, voters express frustration about not being heard by their current representative. They talk about rising premiums, health care costs. They talk about the rising cost of prescription drugs. They want someone who's going to protect Medicare and Social Security and fight for good-paying jobs in our area, and tax relief that's actually going to go to benefit the middle class and working individuals, not the wealthiest in our community, not the major corporations.
Right, and so I want to talk about what you think is the most important issue as voters go to the polls in this election. What should they be looking for, and what do you want to execute on once you get right into Washington?
Well, there's so many issues that are important in this upcoming election. I can tell you that the issue that we've heard the most about in the 11 town hall meetings that we have done throughout the congressional district is health care. Right now, people are facing rising premiums because of the 2-year attack on the Affordable Care Act. So people are paying more for their health insurance, and many people are losing their health insurance. So the first thing we need to focus on in Washington is stopping the attacks on the Affordable Care Act. I want to work with both parties to find solutions to bring down these rising premiums. My solution is not repealing the Affordable Care Act like my opponent voted to do, something that would have kicked 23 million Americans off of their health insurance, 40,000 people alone here in this congressional district, something that would have made it easier for these big insurance companies to discriminate against people with pre-existing conditions. There's 289,000 people in this congressional district that have pre-existing conditions. So we need to stop the attacks and trying to take away health care, and I want to work on ways we can bring people together so everyone has health care in this country. I don't think health insurance should be a privilege only enjoyed by a few. I think it should be a right that's enjoyed by everybody.
Right, and so I also want to talk about working across the aisle. Many have criticized you for coming from Albany, which is not known to be the most, which is very democratic, and many people have their own beliefs about that. How will you work across the aisle with your Republican colleagues if elected to the House?
Well, just like I have done during my time in the state assembly. The assembly is controlled by Democrats, but the state senate is controlled by Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
So I have worked with both Republicans in the state assembly. For example, I've worked with the leader of the Republicans, Brian Kolb, on a bill to give cancer benefits to volunteer firefighters. I've worked with my colleague, Senator Joe Griffo, who's a Republican, on bringing more funding to our area for infrastructure improvements, for increased education funding, for more economic development. And that's my track record here at home, and working with local officials as well on both sides of the aisle. That's what we need more of in Washington right now. We need people who can come together. You know, John McCain would always say before he passed away that when we put a bill up to vote in Washington, we shouldn't be asking ourselves, how do we get this bill passed with just Republican support, or how do we get this bill passed with just Democratic support? The question should always be, how do we get this bill passed with both parties supporting it so we can have a better law for the American people? That's something I'll always strive towards in Washington, working with the president, working with people on both sides of the aisle to get things done.
Right, and in many, there have been quite a few ads this season going both directions, but many of the themes in the ads that are against you is that you are a Pelosi, Cuomo, Silver write-in. Would you like to comment about each of those three individuals that they're saying that you support and that support you?
Yeah, well, sometimes I question whether my opponent knows who she's running against in this election, because she wants to run against those three individuals instead of me. The fact is, I've always been independent, and you can see in my track record with the governor, I have stood up to the governor on many occasions. You know, I didn't vote for the SAFE Act here in New York State when he was pushing education reforms that I thought were harmful to teachers and students. I was one of a handful of Democrats to vote against those reforms. When I felt the governor was ignoring the Mohawk Valley region, I held my own State of the State address with an empty chair for the governor because I felt he was not doing enough to pay attention to this region's economic woes. So I've stood up to the governor. I was one of a handful of Democrats that led the charge to oust Sheldon Silver from his role as Speaker. You can read about that in the Wall Street Journal in an article entitled, "When Silver Dug In, Young Guns Revolted." I helped lead the charge on that. And when it comes to Nancy Pelosi, despite my repeated statements saying I'm not voting for her, my opponent has tried to tie me to her as much as she can. She's not running a campaign based on her record, because when you dig into her record, you'll see how terrible it is. She's running a campaign of distraction because she knows that her record is not a winning record.
Right. Another thing that they wanted to discuss, too, is the recent confirmation of Justice Kavanaugh. Now, she has said that you will work to impeach Justice Kavanaugh as well as the president. Are either of those things true?
Those are both lies as well, Luke. I've said repeatedly I'm not interested in impeachment. People at the town hall meetings we're doing don't talk about impeachment. They talk about not being able to afford their health care. They're worried about paying for their prescription drugs. They're worried about paying their increased costs, like their cable bill, their gas prices, their health insurance premiums. Those are the kinds of conversations and issues I'm going to focus on in Washington. My opponent's going to try and distract people from the true issues because she doesn't want you to know her record on those issues, which is abysmal, and focus on these national issues that are meant to try and divide people.
Right, and also an important issue that the House was able to get across this year was tax reform. How do you think that her tax reform bill has affected the middle class in these communities?
Well, in our community, where the average household income is about $48,000, it hasn't helped many people here. You know, we have a tax bill where 83% of the benefits that my opponent voted for, 83% of the benefits went to the wealthiest individuals in this country and the major corporations. I also want tax cuts, but the kind of tax cuts I want to see are tax cuts that go to working families, people in the middle class, small businesses, and farms here in upstate New York. There's an interesting study done not too long ago that looked at the biggest beneficiaries under this tax bill, the Fortune 500 companies. And that study looked at the workers that work for those companies. Out of all of those workers that work at places like Walmart and Home Depot and Charter Communications, Only 4% of them, 4% saw any increase in their wages after this tax bill. And 433 of those companies had said they have no intention of sharing the tax cut with their workers. That's sad. What they're using it for is to enrich their shareholders by giving a lot of stock buybacks, but it's not helping the workers who truly need a break right now.
Mm-hmm. And then the president is also expected to come back to the district. So he had come once before for Claudia, and many people have pointed out that Claudia's relationship with the president is good for our region, and it brings a lot of attention to the Utica area. How would you work with the president to ensure that the people of Utica and the people of the 22nd district are not passed over for things?
Well, I think the fact is the president came to this district because Ms. Tenney has a very competitive congressional race. Otherwise, he wouldn't be here. But I will work with the president on issues that we can find common ground. He has talked about infrastructure investment. I very much want to work with the president on investing in our infrastructure. He's talked about the high cost of prescription drugs and some things we can do to control that. I very much want to work with him on that issue. My job as a representative in Washington, just as it's been here in Albany, is to work with the executive. If the executive is moving forward programs that I think are going to benefit this country and benefit the people that live in my district, I'm going to work with that president. And if the president's putting forward policies that are going to hurt the people in this region, then I'm going to stand up to the president. And that's what we need right now in Washington, someone who is not a rubber stamp, someone who's actually going to put the people, the needs of the people they represent first, not the needs of a party.
Assemblyman Brindisi, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really do appreciate it.
Luke, it's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much for listening to the Elected Podcast. Be sure to tune in on November 6th for our live Election Night special and on October 21st for episode 12 of Elected News. We just started off season 3 of Elected News, so if you want to go watch the premiere, episode 11, be sure to do that right now. You can visit our website, sites.google.com/view/elected, to get the list of all the podcast episodes, more information about our live special, and so much more. Thank you very much for watching. We have a few more interviews going up in the next few days, and next episode on the Elected Podcast, we'll have just 10 days until Election Day, and we're going to break down all the polls for the nationwide races. Thanks so much for listening. I'm your host, Luke Radel.